Okay, today we are talking about style, tone, and irony. Again, sometimes things that people are thinking, well, I don't know if I really get those. I don't even really know if I'm figuring out what they're talking about. So let's talk about that. None of these things should be mysterious to us. Style is the distinctive manner in which a writer arranges words to achieve particular effects. Everyone is familiar with style as far as clothing. Certain people dress in certain ways to achieve certain effects. Would have to do with the way that you decorate your house or your yard or something like this. Everyone has a style, and writers do the same thing with the way they arrange their words. So sometimes they are so distinctive you can tell them even if their name isn't on it. And we use the word diction to refer to the writer's choice of words. Some writers prefer to use very large words that are maybe harder to understand for you, or they use more foreign words that most of us don't know or something like that. Some of them prefer to use plain, ordinary, everyday language that's easier to understand. That diction, their choice of words, would be part of their style. Sentence structure is also part of style. Henry James, who was a late Victorian writer, wrote very long sentences that get very complicated. If any of you have read The Turn of the Screw, which was used in our 101 here a couple semesters back, so you may have read it. Those sentences could be quite complex, and you'd have to sometimes stop and kind of sort them out. That was Henry James. Ernest Hemingway, on the other hand, writes very short, to the point sentences because he was a journalist. And so his style of writing a sentence is completely different than the way that Henry James writes. Some people are going to prefer Victorian. I actually do. Some people are going to prefer Hemingway, who is modern. So styles can be experimental. They can be trying new things. Poets can shape their poems in certain ways. Writers of novels can use different points of view, different characters, things like that. Or it could be very traditional. It could be exactly what you're assuming when you read a novel. But for a good writer, it will be distinctive. They will have a style that you recognize. Now, when we talk about tone, tone is the author's attitude towards the people, places, and events in the story. So you can usually tell, is the author being sarcastic? They can do that quite easily. Are they being upbeat? Are they being gloomy? Are they being disapproving or frustrated or sad? What's the author's attitude towards the story that he's telling? That is what your tone is. So that's a simple thing to understand once it's explained. So don't make that, again, it doesn't have to be overly complicated. Sometimes it might take more than one reading, as we've talked about with things like theme or symbolism, but generally it doesn't take more than one reading. Generally, tone is something you can get fairly immediately for something. I think with Bartleby the Scrivener, you'll see kind of a tone of interest and amazement that a character could write this way. That a character could act this way. The author is kind of amazed at the behavior, and you can tell he's baffled by it. That's the tone that comes across through the author. And just as in life, misreading the author's tone could lead to misunderstanding the entire story. Usually that happens with something like sarcasm. Just like sometimes someone will say something sarcastically and you don't realize it. Authors can be sarcastic. And if that happens, then you may not understand the story, because you don't realize they're being sarcastic in what they say. Or they could be disapproving, and they could be talking about something, but the tone is disapproving. If you don't realize the tone is disapproving, you may think they're just telling you a story and that it's all fine. And then when you go back and read it again, you go, I can tell he was disapproving of what he was saying. He was talking about something he didn't approve of. So generally they're pretty straightforward. But if you do misread the tone, sometimes the story becomes rather difficult to understand. People say that's ironic all the time, but do they really know what that means when they say that's ironic? Because quite often I hear people use the term that's ironic, and what they're talking about is not ironic at all. It may just be surprising or something like that. Irony is a literary device that reveals a reality different than what appears to be. So irony means something is not what it appears to be. So there's three types of irony. There's verbal irony, where a person says one thing and means something else. So again, sarcasm is generally verbal irony. And in fact, my brother, when he's being sarcastic, when he's upset with someone, or when he thinks they're just being stupid, he'll call them honey. And we all know if he's calling somebody honey, he is not being affectionate. And the way he says it, honey, makes it quite clear that he is not being affectionate. Where the word, if you saw it written down, looks like they're being affectionate, but um, that's not what he's meaning. So that kind of verbal irony, you've heard people say things like that all the time, where they're saying one thing, but they're meaning the opposite of what they're actually saying. That's verbal irony. Situational irony is an incongruity between what we expect to happen and what actually happens. For instance, we had the story early on in our book on the story of an hour, where a woman believes her husband to be dead, and when he comes back, instead of being happy about it, she dies. We didn't expect that. It's a situational irony that what should have made her very, very happy made her so sad and upset that she actually died. So that would be the situational irony. And then we have the third type of irony, which is dramatic irony. And that's when you have a difference between what the characters know or say and what the reader knows to be true. There's a Shakespeare play called Coriolanus in which some of the Roman senators are applauding themselves on how neatly they've gotten rid of the general Coriolanus that they didn't want in town, when actually Coriolanus is at the gates of the city with an army. And they're just so proud of themselves, but we know he's at the gates of the city with an army. And so that is dramatic irony. Now, one of the best pieces of dramatic irony that I know is this ad from Jaws, where she's just swimming along. She thinks she's having a good old time, if you've ever seen Jaws. And here's what's in the water beneath her. It's a good picture of dramatic irony.